What's up everyone, it's the Tyrant, and today I'm going to be combining all of my Halo review videos into one long video, which will rank all of the major Halo titles from my least favorite to most favorite. This does exclude some of the side titles like Halo Spartan Assault, Halo Spartan Strike, Halo Wars, and Halo Wars 2, but I do have reviews for those games in this review series. I hope everyone enjoys the video, and thank you all so much for watching. Halo 2. Now, I know a lot of you longtime subscribers already know basically what I'm going to say here, but since the last time I've seriously sat down and talked about my hatred for this game, we've had about maybe 10,000 new people or so show up, and so this is for you guys. But you know what? For those of you who've been here for a while, you're also welcome here too, so it's good to have you here. But before I delve too deep into this, you need to actually understand this. I need to bring you to my level for a second. In order to properly understand my hatred for this game, I need to take you way back in time to when I was in high school. When Xbox and Halo Combat Evolved first came out, I was a junior in high school. I was too broke to afford a new console, but fortunately I had a PlayStation 1 at the time. So yes, the simple fact that I had that kind of console all to myself, I still considered myself to be very fortunate, but I still wasn't involved with the Halo universe quite yet. My #1 game back then was Resident Evil 3. That was my favorite series, and I was going through it every single day with no deaths, doing speedruns, mind you. And so, fun fact, the first time I ever did anything like that, any sort of walkthrough, even though it was only for myself, was with Resident Evil 3 on the original PlayStation. So one day my brother calls me up, and he is a true gamer in every sense of the word, and he has all 3 new consoles at this point. So yes, my older brother calls me up and says, hey, you need to come over here, we need to have a game night, you need to see some of this new stuff. And one of the games on that roster was Halo Combat Evolved. Now my brother had given me some information about this game ahead of time, told me it was a first-person shooter, and honestly I wasn't impressed by the things he said. Now don't get me wrong, it wasn't like I was anti-first-person shooter. I had played games like Doom and Quake and Turok, but they were all sort of repetitive after a while. I enjoyed playing them, but at the same time, they got old after a while. So when he talked to me about this new perspective of a first-person shooter where I was gunning down aliens, it didn't seem like anything new or really that interesting, but he was like, no, you're going to want to see this. So I said, okay, bro, whatever, I'll give it a shot. And so we loaded up Halo Combat Evolved, and we started going through the first mission. Now, I will say this, the graphics looked a lot better than anything I'd ever seen before. But what really struck me at the very beginning was the fact that there seemed to be a narrative to this. There was an actual story involved. It wasn't just shooting things. You were doing it with a purpose. So I decided to give this thing a chance. We started going through the first mission, and we were fighting grunts and elites, but I realized something, that they weren't just monsters that were out to get you. They had personality. They were working together as teams. They weren't just running at you. They were going side to side. They were doing all these things that I've never really seen enemies do in a first-person shooter prior to Halo Combat Evolved. But what really grabbed my attention wasn't just that. It was the fact that you had Marines fighting on your side. Every first-person shooter I'd ever played prior to this, you were on your own fighting the world. But here you had actual allies. They had personalities. They're sitting there cracking jokes. They're sitting there making all these funny sounds and gestures and all that stuff. And I was just like, wow, okay, there's some personality here. So by the time I got to the end of the first mission, I was like, okay, well, it's better than I thought, but it still isn't anything mind-blowing. And then I got to the second mission. The world opened up, and I'm sitting there going, what the hell is this? I played a lot of first-person shooters in my day, but they're all linear. You're in corridors with just endless monsters coming at you, but this was the first semi-open world experience I'd ever faced in a first-person shooter environment. I noticed that when the Covenant were first coming down to the dropships, they weren't just individual monsters out to get you, they were working together as teams, and that blew me away. So I went from, nah, that doesn't sound that interesting, to, okay, I'll give this a chance, to, oh my god, give me more. We played all the way up through Truth and Reconciliation, so I got to see all the cool alien interiors of the ship, the gravity beams, all sorts of different alien types, and especially the hunters. That was cool. That was the first type of boss battle I'd ever had that was organic to the experience. It wasn't world-breaking, and it just blew my mind completely. So after I had this experience playing Halo Combat Evolved for the first time, I got a part-time job, saved up my money for 6 months, and finally went to purchase an Xbox and my own copy of Halo Combat Evolved. And I'll never forget that day, too. I walked into Funko Land with a sack full of cash. I'm sure they thought I was either broke and spending my money in the wrong place, or some sort of drug dealer, which I was 17, so I wasn't a drug dealer, but I could see where they were coming from with that. And I spent every last bit of money that I had. I even took out this sack full of quarters and dropped them on the counter, and the guy's looking at me like, you asshole. But I didn't care. I had my Xbox, so I took that home with my copy of Halo Combat Evolved, and I kept it hidden forever. I didn't want my parents finding out that I'd spent all this money on a game console, so I made sure that it was in plain sight, but something that wouldn't stand out necessarily. I made sure I hid it in plain sight so I could still play it, but I didn't want my parents knowing that it was something other than PlayStation. So it took them months to figure out that I even had an Xbox, and by that time I was like, yeah, that's always been there. And I couldn't wait to play through the whole campaign. I started out on easy because I wasn't MythicTyrant back then, and I had never played Halo Combat Evolved before, or a first-person shooter on this level, so I decided, you know what, let's take it easy. I just want to relax and enjoy the game. I got halfway through the game, and all of a sudden the Flood show up, and that took me so by surprise. Having AI versus AI, teams versus teams fighting each other, and just having that twist, it just blew me away completely. I was so excited. I was engrossed in the game and the Halo experience at that point. And I loved it so much that once I was done beating it on easy, I immediately cranked it up to Legendary and played it all the way through. And this is the one time I've actually won at my brother, because I beat it on Legendary before him, and he had it like a year before I did. That's right, the Tyrant had bragging rights for once against his older brother. But I still wasn't done yet. I wanted more. I wanted to see all the emblems next to this mission. So I went back and played the game on normal and then on heroic, and it felt so complete, but at the same time, I still wanted more. So I did something I never do with games. I took out the instruction manual and started reading it, because I don't know if you know this or not, but it actually includes a little backstory on the events that happened on Reach and everything that happened just prior to the events of Halo Combat Evolved. So you get a nice backstory of their universe and of their world, and it's just, I felt engrossed in it, this nice science fiction universe, and I just wanted more of it. So my brother, get this, my brother actually brings over something else to appease me, and it's Halo: The Fall of Reach. So basically I was like, well, at first I didn't really know what I wanted from this, because I wasn't a reader, because reading's for suckers, damn it. But I said, okay, I will give this a try. And from the first chapter, Eric Nyland made me feel like I was in the Halo universe, like I was seeing someone actually play a different Halo game. You learn about how Master Chief and the other Spartans were abducted when they were kids, how they went through years and years of training. You hear about the scientific process behind their augmentation, how they were trained to fight the insurrection, and then the Covenant show up, and it just blows you away, as well as the people in the book. This was something they didn't expect, they didn't anticipate, but the Spartans were like their frontline guys. They're like, without these guys, we are toast against these aliens. These aliens start wiping out world after world, and then they get to Reach, which is like the last stronghold before they get to Earth. There's this massive battle that ensues both on space and on the surface of the planet, and it's tragic. You think they might have a shot here because they've won Covenant battles before, and this is Reach. This is one of the most protected planets in the human colony, but no, it doesn't work out that way. The Covenant win and glass the planet, and the Pillar of Autumn with Master Chief on board barely escapes. That brings us up to Halo Combat Evolved, and so from there I went ahead and decided to read the book The Flood, and I learned the hard way there that not all books translate well from first-person shooters. But that was okay, I dealt with it. Then one day my brother comes over with a demo disc that he got from an Xbox magazine, and on this demo disc had the trailer, the teaser trailer, the first one for Halo 2. Let's stop for a second and just check this out. Look at these graphics. This looks like something out of a movie. When you see Master Chief going down that hall, picking up his battle rifle, talking with Cortana, hearing all the radio chatter back and forth, you don't really know what's going on until Master Chief gets to that cargo bay. He looks out the window, and what do you see? Earth, and it's getting lit. The Covenant have found Earth. This is huge, because up until this point, the Covenant had been destroying world after world. They haven't found Earth. They haven't found the epicenter of humanity yet, but in this game, they have, and only you can protect it. The best scene here is when Master Chief is sitting there, he's ready, he's opening up those cargo doors, and Cortana says, "What if you miss?" And Master Chief says, "I won't." Then Master Chief gets sucked into space and goes on a trajectory towards one of the Covenant cruisers, and I'm sitting there going, whoa, what am I about to face here? I could not have been more pumped. I was getting a sequel to my now new favorite game of all time. But it got better. Not long after that, the E3 2003 trailer dropped, and if you haven't seen this yet, you need to check this out. Let's take a look at this real quick too. You have to see it. We finally get a look at Earth 500 years into the future, and it takes place in this super city called New Mombasa, and it looks like a double or triple decker city, something I'd never even imagined before. And while the graphics didn't look quite as polished as what we saw in the teaser trailer, I really didn't notice at the time, just because of everything that was going on in the gameplay trailer itself. You got Sergeant Johnson giving his prep speech, you've got Master Chief landing in the middle of the city, in the middle of all this chaos, almost getting shot out of the sky by Covenant anti-air, and then you see Marines and Covenant fighting in the streets. You see other Marines getting medical attention, they're getting their wounds treated. It feels like an actual war. You step a little bit more further out, you see Covenant anti-air batteries not only destroying aircraft, but buildings as well. Then you've got longsword fighters coming in and bombing the shit out of them. You see Covenant at street level and you start picking them up with your new weapon, the battle rifle, or as we now come to know it, the DMR, because it was single shot back when this trailer originally debuted. But then a Marine says, no, we got to take the fight to them. Take my weapon. And all of a sudden you find out that you can now dual wield machine guns. Now at the time when I was watching this, I was actually watching the audience live reaction video of it, and you could hear them cheer. They were orgasming in their seats. So then you make your way through the fire and everything, and all of a sudden you see these jackals that are going to start ganging up on you. Then these warthogs come rushing in, smash the jackals to pieces. They're Marines driving warthogs. Who would have thought? And you can actually get on this gun, a new gun called the Gauss Hog, and you don't even have to drive. You can be the gunner at this point, and he starts driving you through the city like crazy. You start shooting at these new dropships called Phantoms, these other large vehicles on the ground called Shadows. You start going after a pack of ghosts, and as you're gunning them down, the Marines like counting them for you, like here's 1, here's 3, who's for 4? Then this Phantom dropship swoops in and drops these new ape-like enemies onto the Warhawk. They start swiping the Marines out. I'm like, oh shit. Now you're fighting a pack of these guys by yourself, but then you see a ghost come your way, and you hear Cortana go, wait for it. And I'm like, what do you mean, wait for it? And all of a sudden, Master Chief hijacks the thing. How cool is that? The audience was screaming in their seats at this point. They were pissing themselves watching this. Then Master Chief is on the ghost trying to make his escape while he's got an entire fleet of Phantoms and ghosts trailing him right behind him. He goes through this tunnel that says restricted access, and all of a sudden the doors are closing. Master Chief makes it under right in time. The ghosts crash into it. Cortana sees the Covenant cruiser. She's like, all right, great. So all we got to do is, and she pauses and stops because there's fear in her voice at that point. You see Covenant pods raining from the sky like a meteor shower. Elites pop out. The first time you've seen them in this trailer, they all get out their energy swords, and then you hear it. Master Chief takes out his plasma grenade, and Cortana says, bet you can't stick it. And Master Chief says, you're on, bitch, or something like that. And then he just throws it, and the screen goes to black. You got the music blasting. You're jumping up in your chair. You're cheering, and you can't wait to see how this thing turns out. I was so pumped at this point. I couldn't take it anymore. And so when First Strike came out, I immediately grabbed it, started reading, looking for any signs of things that I could expect from Halo 2, learned about how Master Chief got off the ring with Sergeant Johnson, learned about all the stuff that happened in between, and even the process of the Covenant finding Earth, and I'm just like, whoa. Some more time passes, and we get a trailer for E3 2004. This time, we find out the multiplayer aspect of the game. We get to find out we get to be elites in the multiplayer version of the game, and we get to wield the Covenant energy sword. I got to take a sidestep here because the things that I wanted most in the game, what I figured would make this a perfect game, couldn't make it better, is if we could wield the Covenant energy sword, the fuel rod gun from the first game, actually drive a Wraith, and use the Sentinel beam. Those 4 things would have made it perfect, and we were already 1 down. You got to find out that you get to customize your emblems. You found out vehicles were destructible, and I'm just sitting there the entire time going, this is awesome. This just keeps getting better and better. The new map, Zanzibar, I didn't find that particularly appealing, but finding out that maps and scenery could be destructible was pretty cool. At this point, I couldn't take the excitement anymore. I was thinking about Halo all the time. I was dreaming about it every night. And then November finally rolled around, and it was the eve of the game being released. I couldn't take the excitement. I was so excited that I went to my local GameStop early, just so I could get in line as soon as possible. I couldn't stay at home and think about it any longer. I got to GameStop at 7 p.m., 5 hours before the game was actually in my hands. I was the first person in line. Even the people who were behind the counter were a little shocked that I got there so early, but I brought friends with me that showed up about an hour later, and then all of a sudden, people just started pouring in. I was the first in line of a line that stretched all the way around the mall. We started swapping stories, sharing our favorite aspects of Combat Evolved, what we hoped we would get from Halo 2. And that was the time, damn it, none of this stupid digital bullshit. You got to go to game launches and actually experience your fandom with all these other people. Midnight rolled around, I grabbed my copy of Halo 2, rushed home, put that game disc in. Oh, it felt so good. And then the game started. Before I get any further with this, I need to clarify here that this is the first and only time that I have ditched school and work for a video game. I had been waiting years for this. I certainly wasn't going to be held back by stupid academics when I could be playing Halo 2. But then the game started up, and then you hear those words, there was only one ship. My first thought is, who is speaking here? I don't recognize this voice. And it shows High Charity, and then you get to the inside of High Charity, and then you see the prophets, and who we later know as the Arbiter. The first thought to enter my head was, wait, now the Covenant can speak English? Look, when I feel like it comes to alien movies, there are basically two types of people. There are those who enjoy space operas like Star Wars and Star Trek, where all the alien species can understand each other. And then there are folks that are in my category, and they like more aggressive aliens that are more like a lethal force of nature, like Independence Day or War of the Worlds. I'm in the latter category, so I'm not really into the whole space opera thing. So when I saw this, I was kind of like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And it wasn't just that they spoke English, they did it like bad mid-20th century actors. You have the Arbiter saying, I do not belong in their presence. You have Tartarus going, lucky hit, you shall not land another. Now, at first I decided to give this a pass. They're showing basically the Covenant perspective of what happened post-Halo events. We're just getting a glimpse of their world here. We're never going to see it again. We'll deal with it. And then the first mission starts up with the Master Chief. You're in Cairo Station, you see the boarding parties coming in for the Covenant, and then the doors explode and everything goes to hell. Grunts and elites alike come charging through, and immediately I knew something felt a little off. The grunts were charging straight at you. The elites were kind of standing in one place, unloading their plasma rifles as fast as they could and dropping you as quick as possible, which felt very different from the first game. In the first game, the grunts would at least try to strafe a little bit and even run away and hide in certain scenarios, and elites would run back and forth and take random shots at you, not stand in one place, just unload everything they had. And speaking of the elites, in the first game, there were 5 different classes of elites: miners, majors, special ops, strike team, and zealots. Those are all back in Halo 2, but they add a couple of new ranks, mostly the ultras and the flying ones. I think they're called ranger elites. And I shit you not, you see all of these guys in the very first mission of the game. There's no escalation at all, no ease into it, all of them. And if you're playing on Legendary, you even see a motherfucking zealot come out of one of the pods. I mean, why? Why would you send a zealot, an elite general of all things, on a suicide mission right alongside his inferior troops? I mean, literally right off the bat, this felt less like an open world or semi-open world first-person shooter, and it felt more like an arcade shooter. This wasn't what I signed up for. What I loved about the first game is that it stood apart from that bullshit. So as I progressed with the mission, I eventually get to the part with the drones. Now, I'd heard about the drones in advance, and I thought they would be something like what we see with the Watchers in Halo 4 and 5, where they're basically aerial infantry units, something to take the place of the Banshees, something far less powerful, but something that can support infantry from the air. No, what happens is you get a wall, a swarm of these guys just pouring at you. They all attach to different parts of the wall and just start shooting, and you have to sit there and pick them all off. I'm like, what the hell is this? All it did was slow down the game. And so after you get to that point and you progress even further, you get to the final room with the bomb in it, and it's just guarded by elites. There's no variety at all whatsoever. It's just elites. It doesn't look anything like Combat Evolved. And once you finally get rid of all those guys and you set the bomb, you drag it down, all of a sudden you get that cutscene that was in the original teaser trailer, and I'm sitting there going, I don't remember a bomb there, but okay, whatever. And so Master Chief gets sucked out the airlock, goes through and starts going through space, steering the bomb with him, and then a couple of longsword fighters blow up a part of the Covenant ship that he's heading towards. He goes inside, detonates the bomb. That's it. What I originally thought was going to be the very first mission in Halo 2 turned out to be nothing more than but a footnote in the game. Alright, so then Master Chief lands on In Amber Clad, and Miranda Keyes, the new captain, says, alright, we got to take this fight to the surface. And I'm thinking, finally, we get to see what I saw back in E3 2003. Nope. Remember that futuristic city you saw? Remember those highways and all that open world experience? No, none of it's there. Instead, you're treated to a bunch of brick and clay buildings that looks less like a futuristic city and more like the marketplace from Aladdin. So you get to the first courtyard battle where you have to hold off waves of troops because you can't pursue until you've destroyed all the waves. So I get up to the top and all of a sudden, zap! And you know what I'm talking about too, the very bane of my existence, the thing I hate more than anything else in Halo, and that's the Halo 2 Jackal Sniper. I shit you not, an enemy that can shoot through walls from the hip, is barely visible, can spawn in different locations every time, and one-shot the Chief no matter where he hits him. And the Master Chief is the icon of the series. It takes multiple shots with the beam rifle to kill a fucking grunt, but only one to kill the Master Chief. What the hell? As if the new campaign experience didn't feel closed in enough compared to Combat Evolved. Now you had these guys weighing you down. And that's when I really started to notice that these missions were a lot more linear and scripted than Combat Evolved. This did not feel like the semi-open world experience that I'd had before. So we're going through outskirts. I'm like, okay, well maybe this is just the beginning of it. We haven't gotten to the good stuff yet. It's too early in the game. And then I get to the tunnel part, and I'm like, wait a minute, what did I miss here? And so I'm going through the tunnel, going through all the Covenant barricades, whatever, and then I get to the end of the tunnel, and I'm like, what just happened? The cutscene from the trailer never happened, but all of a sudden, here I am out in the open. So I was supposedly past the part that was in E3 2003. So this mission starts you out with the tank. I'm like, okay, you know what? Things are starting to look up. Then you get to the other side of the bridge, and you're met with another tunnel. So then I'm going, okay, whatever, we'll go through this, we'll plow through this. It's gotta be on the other side, right? This can't be it. So you fight through another army of jackal snipers, you get to the other side of the tunnel, and you're in some sort of courtyard with more jackal snipers. But then you grab a warthog, you start steering your way past a wraith, and all of a sudden, boom, here you are in the futuristic city. This is what you've been waiting for, until you pass the corner and realize it's one city block. All you gotta do is destroy 2 wraiths, and that's your city experience. Or should I say, shitty experience. Then you end up having to go up against this scripted scarab. I can't think of anything more anticlimactic than that bullshit, but you do anyway, and I figure, okay, it's only going to get better from here. But then you see the gravity lift disappear from the Covenant cruiser and starts going into slip space. Miranda Keys is going, we need to go through, push it, green light, green light. I'm like, no green light, no green light. We still have Covenant back there. We need to go back to New Mombasa. Come on, let's finish this fight, damn it. And then you disappear into the slip space portal, and that's it. That is it. That is your earthly experience. After everything we've seen at this point, after all the marketing that pinpointed that Earth was the final stronghold, that this game was about saving Earth, the Master Chief protecting the final stronghold for humanity, after all that, after 14 missions, 14 playable missions, and yes, I'm counting Armory because they counted as a mission, and I'm going to count it as one too. 14 playable missions, only 2 of them. 2 missions out of 14 take place on the surface of the Earth. After everything we've seen, after all the marketing experience, after everything this has been leading to, that's what we get from it. But it doesn't just stop there. The very next mission, I realize, oh, we're not done with the English-speaking aliens yet. That's right, we played the Arbiter. I feel like the Arbiter is one of the more controversial topics in the series because I do like the Arbiter as a character. I even like his missions, but just after everything that I'd experienced with Halo at this point, this was a complete 180. I didn't want to experience things from a Covenant perspective. I wanted them to be the bad guys, the enemy, the force of nature that we had to conquer to survive. But now we get to see things from his perspective. And I'm not going to lie to you, even though I do like the Arbiter and I do like his missions, I hate the Heretic missions. I just don't like them. I love Marty O'Donnell's music, but I hated the music in this mission. I hated the amber tone. I hated the fact that I could, at least at first, not tell the difference between my allies and the enemies. It was confusing, and it was just irritating. And this was also the first mission where I got to experience Covenant weaponry for the first time. I was looking forward to trying the new stuff, but then I actually got to try it and was like, this isn't anything new or different. It's not unique. These are just Covenant equivalents to human weapons. It's a different flavor of the same damn thing. The carbine's nothing more than a colorful battle rifle. The beam rifle's nothing more than a colorful sniper rifle. Yes, one uses energy, the other uses ballistics, but they basically function the same way. Halo Combat Evolved had a much smaller weapons box, that's true, but each weapon felt unique and different. You had the plasma pistol and the plasma rifle, and they both had their strengths and weaknesses. With the human, and even the Needler, you know, it was a homing grenade launcher if used correctly. With the human side, yes, you only had a few weapons, but it was everything you needed. That's it. You had the standard pistol, the standard machine gun, the standard shotgun for close range, the standard sniper rifle for long range, and then the all-powerful, whatever you want to call it, rocket launcher for clearing out big masses of enemies and vehicles. But in Halo 2, they just replicate everything. Even the fuel rod gun that I was so looking forward to using isn't the mortar weapon it was in Combat Evolved anymore. It's now an alien rocket launcher. That's all it is an alien rocket launcher. I was disappointed with the sword because it didn't have that cool glow like in Combat Evolved. Now it had this weird lungy thing, and on top of that, it looked like a piece of plastic with swirly designs in it, like something you'd buy at Spencer's. This was not what I was expecting to get. Even the Wraith was sort of disappointing. It was the closest thing to what I was looking for, but at the same time, the enemies always had these secondary cannons that they could use, but you couldn't use them, so that sucked. You had this tease of something fun you could do, and the game just takes it away from you. Okay, I'm getting a little off track at this point. So then you're going through the Forerunner facility. You get to the bottom, and there's a Banshee there, so now you gotta chase after the Heretic leader because apparently he's a dick, and all of a sudden it starts playing rock music in the background. Now, I like rock music, and I love Halo, but the two don't go well together. I want to hear Marty O'Donnell in the background, not rock and roll. So anyway, you're going through with this Banshee doing dogfights, doing circles around this entire facility, and then you land. And that's where the next mission picks up, and this is what really gets me. In the teaser to the Halo 2 campaign, the original teaser, it says the parasite is gone. The war with them is over. Now, it doesn't directly say that the Flood will not be in Halo 2, but it implies it. It strongly implies it, but no. They unceremoniously infiltrate the campaign, and they do so just so unclimactically. And the Flood seem a lot different here. They don't seem like the Flood from Combat Evolved. There are far less of them, but the ones that are there are a lot stronger. Some have shields, a lot of them are just tougher in general. Some have sniper rifles, and others have homing rocket launchers. I don't know what Dick thought that would be a good idea, but yep, there it is. So you get through all that mess to finally confront the heretic leader, and what do you know? Bungie has introduced boss battles into their universe. You know, standard universe-breaking boss battles where you can only kill it a certain way when the game wants you to. Yeah, that's pretty much what this is, except he's got friends in the form of holograms that aren't real creatures. They can just do as much damage as the real thing, that's all. Because I kept thinking the entire time in the Combat Evolved game that the only thing the game was missing was a universe-breaking boss battle. And in case you didn't catch on there, that's sarcasm. So you defeat the heretic leader. Tartarus once again proves his dick by taking 343 guilty sparks, saying that Arbiter doesn't have credit for it or whatever, and thus the Arbiter's missions come to an end. Then it switches. You're back in the shoes of the Master Chief, and what do you know? You're on another Halo ring, except this one doesn't look as cool as the last one. It's all old. It's got ancient ruins and stuff on it, other than, you know, just, it doesn't have all the metallic stuff, all the futuristic looking things, all the alien looking things that the first one had. So basically you have a B version of the first Halo. And throughout these two missions, I find it interesting because you see all these pretty backgrounds that are teased at you, you know, just to remind you that you can't really go there and that Halo 2 isn't as open world as the first game. So you're going through, using a tank, mind you, through these tight little corridors and stuff, and that's basically it. And you do this all the way up until your second boss battle, which is the Prophet of Regret. And all you can do to beat him is punch him in the face, because fuck rockets, right? At this point in the game, I was starting to get bored. I wasn't really that much frustrated as I was disappointed. So I stopped the game there, and I didn't pick it up again until about a week had passed. Yeah, that's right. That's how I was treating a game that I've been waiting for years, stood in line for 5 hours for, and just could not wait to play. I stopped it halfway through and just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't finish it right then. I'd lost my patience. I was just too disappointed to carry it out. But I did pick it up again a week later and started with the missions of the Arbiter on the Halo ring. And I'll admit, the game does pick up a little bit from there. You know, at least the music's really good. The action's ramping up a little bit, and it does fit the combat pretty well. And then I was done with the Arbiter missions, and we encountered the Grave Mine. So it's already bad enough the Flood are in this game, even though I thought they weren't going to be. But now apparently the Flood can also talk. So now this is a full-fledged space opera. Space zombies can now speak English. How wonderful. Just what I always wanted. So after the giant rhyming Venus flytrap thing sends you both on your way, Master Chief ends up on High Charity. And I was kind of looking forward to this, seeing the inside of that massive city, except you really don't. You see it, okay, that's to be fair, but the entire time you're basically going on the outskirts and in the towers of the city. You don't actually get to see the city itself. You get to see it, I should say, but you never actually get to play in it. I mean, you get to see this beautiful scenery, including the giant dreadnought ship in the middle, the Forerunner dreadnought ship. You never get to see the inside of that, even though it's a key plot point in the series. You never get to play in the city itself, ever, in the Halo series, and that was so disappointing to me. Seeing that there is just a big tease and nothing more. And beyond that, the mission was damn near impossible, especially on Legendary. Half the time I would be dying before I could even see my reticle. And of course, this is where you see brutes for the first time, but you can't really appreciate them because they're fighting the elites, and there's this Covenant civil war breaking out all around you. They're not working together anymore, and it's just kind of like, what has Halo turned into at this point? I mean, I enjoyed how the action was ramping up. The music set it perfectly with its own tone, but it just, it took something away. This did not feel like Combat Evolved. And then, of course, you resume in the Arbiter shoes, or hooves, or whatever you want to call them. And so he does his thing, trying to pick up the pieces with him and the other elites. Everyone's like, oh, the Arbiter's alive, that's great. And so you're starting this resistance against the brutes. Then it switched back to the Master Chief, and he's going through a flood-infested High Charity, which I don't even know how they got there to begin with. Presumably they invaded Forward Unto Dawn, or whatever, in Amberclad, or whatever ship Miranda Keyes had in that one. Somehow slip-spaced in, and boom, okay, there's flood everywhere now, whatever. Anyway, Master Chief's going through there entirely. He gets to the conduit and uses it to rocket towards the key ship, and then that's the Master Chief story right there. Then it picks up with the Arbiter for the final mission of the game. I don't know who thought using the Arbiter to play the main guy in the final mission of the game was a good idea, but it was a bad idea, and fuck you for it. But anyway, so the game ends right there. You know, you save you stop Halo from firing right then and there, so you save the galaxy temporarily. Then it switches back over to the Master Chief, who's left Cortana behind in High Charity, and he's approaching Earth, and I'm like, okay, maybe it'll happen now. Maybe we'll see E3 2003 at this point. And it stops it. it brings you a motherfucking to be continued. After years of waiting for this game to come out, not only did it not sell on the points that it marketed, but it stops it at a to be continued point. What the hell? So now I've got to wait 2 to 3 more years to find out how the story ends. What were they thinking? And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, Tyrant, they had hardware restrictions, they had time restrictions, there wasn't a lot they could do about it, and I don't give a shit what the excuses are. I'm grading the final product here. That's it. Not what it could be, but what it is. All right, so we talked about the campaign, which is my bread and butter right there. Let's talk about multiplayer for a second, because a lot of you out there are saying multiplayer is what made Halo 2 so great. So let's start out with this. When the game came out in 2004, I didn't have cable internet. It was still not really something that was widely received in the public. It was still relatively unaffordable for most people, you know, middle class and under. And so I didn't actually get cable internet till about 2 years after Halo 2 came out. So I never really got to experience the multiplayer side of Halo 2, at least not for a while. But what I did hear about it is what I read on the forums, and apparently the game was full of modders and cheaters, doing things like making warthogs fly or making plasma rifles shoot Gauss rounds from the Gauss hog. That type of shit I could deal with in Halo PC, but Halo 2 is a console thing. It's for Xbox. It shouldn't be like that. PCs were made for modding, but not Xbox. Or at least that's my take on it. You shouldn't use modding for cheating. You should use it for something like Halo SPV3, and I will attest to that. Guys, at the end of the day, I just wasn't feeling Halo 2. I mean, I know it brought a lot of positive things to the table, like dual wielding, vehicle hijacking, a new arsenal of weapons, whether you liked them or not. Okay, we can at least accept that. And I will say that my personal silver lining to the game is that without Halo 2, we wouldn't have a game as excellent as Halo 3. So I will give it credit for that much. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Halo 2 is a bad game in the grand scope of games. It isn't. It's just everything I'd come to expect in the Halo universe and what had brought me to this point. It just, Halo 2 didn't fit that scenario. It went off in a completely different direction. So that's what disappointed me so much, on top of the fact that it was nothing like what I expected it to be. And part of that is, granted, my fault. Maybe I overhyped the game. But Bungie gave me the tools to overhype the game to begin with. So you can't put all the blame on me on that one. So while I will say that Halo 2 isn't a great game in the Halo series, at least not for me, in fact, it's the worst game in the Halo series, in my opinion, I will say that on the grander scope, yes, it is a great game by itself. If you eliminate all the other Halo factors there, if you had taken out all the experience I'd had with Halo prior, and it was just all the other games I'd played, I would say that Halo 2 knocked it out of the park, because in that respect it did. It had a great story, had decent weapons for what they were if I hadn't played the original game, and it was something exciting. Epic music, an epic story with great characters. So I give credit where credit is due. I still have to rate this game as I would any other video game. It's not easy for me to do, especially with all my experience that I've had with Halo 2, but I'm rating this as a standalone game, not as a Halo game, and in that respect, I will say that Halo 2 is worth buying on sale. Halo Reach. Now hold on a second, I know what you're thinking and probably doing right now. You're already starting to type in the comment section, even though you haven't seen the full video yet. You just saw the title. I'm telling you, stop, take your fucking hands off the keyboard and watch the whole damn thing and then comment. First of all, you'll be happy to know that unlike Halo 2, I do not hate Halo Reach at all. I actually enjoy it. I think it's a good game and even a good Halo game overall. No, it's not that at all. I just don't like Halo Reach as much as the other Halo games, with the exception of Halo 2, and today I'm going to break it down for you as to why I feel the way I do. And if you haven't already guessed, this is the second part of a series of videos that I'm doing to rank all of the Halo games, with the one talking about Halo 2 being the first, and the other ones will follow. So I'm ranking the Halo games from least favorite to most favorite, and I'm going in order that way. This is basically an expansion of my Halo Time Travel and Evolution video, where I did mini reviews of all the Halo games that were out at that point. Halo 5 was not out at that point, and so I'm including it in this series. And you know, the thing of it is, I feel like in a lot of ways, Halo Reach suffered the same issues that Halo 2 did, in that it was overhyped. And why wouldn't you overhype Reach? Unlike other Halo games, this actually has a setting that players are familiar with way ahead of the game. No, seriously, even if you never read the book The Fall of Reach, the events that took place on Reach and the fall of Reach itself is referenced in nearly every major Halo title. When I think of the actual fall of Reach, I think it's basically their Pearl Harbor or 9/11 of their universe. It's like 9/11 because it's an extreme, unexpected tragedy, and it's like Pearl Harbor because Reach was the military industrial center for all of humanity. Because of the way Reach was described in the book as being this souped up military installation, whenever I pictured Reach, I pictured the Death Star if the rebels took control of it. That's no moon. That's a space station. And the events in the book are pretty interesting too. The reason that the whole military buildup was there was because they were fighting an insurrection. Then halfway through the book, the Covenant show up and take humanity completely by surprise. They start one-shotting world after world, glassing them, killing millions of people in the process, and eventually they show up on Reach. And this is important because Reach is not only the big military complex of humanity, but it's also at Earth's doorstep. So if Reach falls, Earth is not going to be far behind it. When the Covenant finally find Reach, they show up in this massive armada, a surprise attack of over 300 Covenant cruisers, and this is the type of motherfucking battle you bring your brown pants to. And the UNSC puts up a great fight, but ultimately they lose. They fail. The fleet gets completely wiped out, almost all the Spartans are killed off, and ultimately the planet is glassed and destroyed. This is an unexpected tragedy for the humans, and they know at this point they are on the brink of extinction. So when I first heard they were going to turn the events of Reach into a video game, I'm like, yep, gotta have it. That's a must. And I'll admit, I was so excited for this game, and I feel like that is part of the problem there, is that I was overhyping this because of all the knowledge that I had prior to the game coming out of the planet Reach and everything that happened to Reach. So before I delve into this anymore, let's start out with the things that I really did like about Reach, because I don't want to go completely negative here, because there were things about the game that I really did enjoy. First of all, they finally got rid of those stupid English-speaking Covenant. Now, if the player came in at Halo 2 or later, they were probably a little bit confused, and I still wasn't happy that the grunts couldn't speak English either, but at least now it was back to science fiction instead of that space opera bullshit that Halo 2 and Halo 3 pulled off. I like the fact that the weapons were unique again. In Halo 2 onward, they felt like they had to have Covenant equivalents to all the human weapons, which made no sense to me. But in Halo Reach, they dial it back a little bit, and like with Halo Combat Evolved, all the weapons feel very unique and very different with each other for the most part, even if some of them, like the plasma repeater, are completely useless. For those two things alone, thank you, Bungie. Thank you for finally listening to your fans. This is also the only Bungie Halo game where they had campaign, matchmaking, firefight, and forge all on one disc. And best of all, they had matchmaking for all of them except for Forge. But you didn't really need it for Forge, but they had matchmaking for everything else, and that was cool. And finally, to top it all off, it was the only AAA Bungie title for Halo that did not have the Flood in it at all. It's only the Covenant that are in it this time. You were fighting the full force of the Covenant Empire. And that all sounds fucking awesome, right? So after all that, how can it fall below my expectations? Okay, so first let's talk about the campaign, because that's my personal bread and butter, and if the campaign sucks, then the game isn't worth my time. So as I already said, if you're a Halo fan who's been playing, especially since Combat Evolved, you already know a fair amount about Reach, so this was supposed to be the game version of that. At least so I thought, because in the book, most of what you find out that happened on Reach, the big battle that happens at the end of the book, happens in space. But there is stuff that happens planetside too, and that's what the game focuses on. And at first I thought that was going to be a good thing. We get to see a different perspective of the war and find out some new information. But it doesn't happen anything like it did in the book. In the book, the Covenant show up with a surprise attack force of 300 cruisers, but in the game, you find out that the Covenant actually came to Reach sooner. We're talking days before. As a matter of fact, they got on the planet 12 fucking hours before anyone knew they were there. And when the UNSC finally discovers that the Covenant are on Reach, you hear the guy announcing it over the radio, and he sounds bored. He's sitting there going, the Covenant are on Reach, the Covenant are on Reach. And I'm like, dude, you should be fucking shitting your pants right now. There should be some anxiety in your voice. What is wrong with you? To me, that's like if a Russian warship showed up about 20 miles off the coast of Florida, it started invading overnight, 12 hours before anyone even knew what was going on, and the governor of Florida comes on and says, oh yeah, the Russians are here. That's what this felt like. I mean, Reach, of all things, you should be panicking. This is the military epicenter of humanity. This felt completely underwhelming compared to the events that happened in the book. And so to help combat this threat, we get in the shoes of Noble Team, more specifically Noble 6, and most of these guys are Spartan 3s with the exception of George, who was a Spartan 2. The Spartan characters themselves really didn't stand out. A lot of them felt overly cliche. You have the silent type, the crazy guy, the smart girl. The one that really stood out for me was George, because he was the sympathetic one, the father figure. He was the one who looked out for everyone else, not Carter, the cliche leader one. And I can't tell you how many times that bitch cat drove me off a fucking cliff. Although, to be fair, when I found out what the actress looked like who plays Cat, I started cozying up to her a little bit. And it's funny because in Ackman's video, he points out that Reach is more of a settings-focused game than a character-focused game, and I agree with him. The problem with that is, even though that worked for Halo Combat Evolved, is because that was the first game out there. We knew nothing about Halo at that point. By the time Reach rolled around, Halo had been around for 9 years, and we saw some serious character development over that time period. Reach just did not have that. So as I'm moving through the first few missions of the game, I noticed that we're back to the linear scripted concepts that Halo 2 had. It's not like it didn't have any open worldness at all, but it was a lot more restricted than we had seen in Halo 3 and Halo 3 ODST, and that was disappointing to me. So this goes on for the first few missions of the game. That was the disappointing part for me, and then we get to the mission Tip of the Spear, and the Covenant supercarrier appears. Then somehow after that, the carrier managed to get to space without getting attacked at all. This is what gets me right here. After everything that I thought Reach was, it has all these orbital MAC cannons. It's supposed to have this massive fleet, and none of it's there to combat the Covenant. This makes no sense to me. We saw the MAC guns work earlier in the game, but apparently they're not later on in the missions. And then there's this soundbite from the AI Dot who says the next battle cluster is like 36 hours out, and I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You're in the heat of an interstellar war. Reach is your most important military installation. Why don't you have an entire fleet of your ships protecting it? But it gets better. They have to destroy the supercarrier by hijacking a Covenant Corvette and putting a slip space drive in it because for whatever reason they don't have any nuclear weapons. And then to top it off, my favorite Spartan in the game, George, the one that I could relate to the most, dies in that mission halfway through the game. Okay, so when we finally got the first half of the game out of the way, the rest of it felt more on point with what I was expecting. You see cities being destroyed, you see the planet being glassed, you see cities in trouble, civilians trying to escape. To me, that felt like what I was more along the lines of expecting from Halo Reach. I still didn't completely understand why they stuck around in New Alexandria for so long, even though the city was being completely glassed, but you know what, at least it made it look interesting in terms of gameplay, and it made you at least see what kind of destruction the Covenant were causing planet-side. But then we get to the mission, The Package, and this is where you find out you're supposed to deliver Cortana to the Pillar of Autumn, who will eventually be delivered to the Master Chief. Once again, this contradicts with the book itself. In fact, it doesn't seem like anyone really has their story straight as to what is canon at this point. If you look at the Halo Wiki, it says one thing. If you read Halsey's journal that came with the Legendary Edition of Halo Reach, it says something completely different. But you know what? The thing of it is, even if you think this is canon, it doesn't match up. The book is not considered canon. There was an interview done with the creative director with Reach, and he said, when he was asked, what about the conflicting canon between the Fall of Reach and Halo Reach, he said, the game canon comes first, basically implying that the book didn't mean anything compared to the game, and that was their stance on it. That stance right there is why I stopped taking the book seriously, and why I hate the fact that now they take the books too seriously. As all these events are taking place, you see all the Spartans being killed off one by one, and we knew this was going to happen. Even the tagline of the game is, before it begins, you know how it ends. But you never really feel for their deaths. None of them are emotional or anything. Some of them are, I guess, symbolic of the type of character they are, but they just feel like they're shoehorned in there. They don't feel like it should have happened the way it did. There's even this one part where the leader of the team, Carter, just plows his Pelican into a scare, but we've seen in the past that Pelicans pack some pretty impressive firepower, and even though he's mortally wounded, he probably could have hung in there a little bit longer to support Noble 6 and Emil. Okay, so the campaign was disappointing, but what else? Let's talk about multiplayer for a second. They did something very unique with Reach, where they made all the maps for multiplayer and Firefight ripped from campaign, which some people like that, and that's fine, but there was no real place in campaign where I stopped and said, this would make an excellent multiplayer map, unlike places in Halo Combat Evolved and Halo 3. Again, some people may have liked that, but I saw that as lazy. They didn't feel unique to the campaign. They weren't special. And that's kind of the thing. I can list almost every single map from Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2, and Halo 3, but I blank when it comes to Reach. I even blanked on what the name of the Blood Gulch remake was. I had to look it up to find out that it was called Hemorrhage. Even now, I cannot remember a single multiplayer map from Reach other than that one and technically Forge World, even though that really wasn't a map so much as it was a canvas. And when you started adding things in like loadouts and ordnance drops and armor abilities, it started feeling less like Halo and more like Call of Duty. And yes, for all of you who hate the concept of sprint in Halo, guess what? It came from Reach. The armor abilities are sort of a unique but dividing situation in the Halo community. The reason why equipment works so well with Halo 3 is because you could only use it once, and you had to use it strategically. If you didn't, you could be put at just as much of a disadvantage as you could an advantage. But the armor abilities in Reach didn't make sense. They felt like they were shoehorned in there. This felt like a prelude to Destiny more than anything else. And on top of that, I'm pretty sure that most of us hated the concept of armor lock. So after having a blast with multiplayer in Halo 3, I got to Reach and was like, you know what, I'll pass on this one. And this leads into Forge World. Now the concept sounds good. It's the biggest Forge map we've ever had. We have more options than we did in Halo 3, but it still didn't feel right. I guess even though the map was the biggest one we'd ever seen, it still felt a little restricted. You had a lot of death barriers, which apparently are all over Reach. I mean, Forge World was the biggest Forge map we'd seen yet, but it still didn't feel great. You had the side of a mountain, you had the Blood Gulch Canyon, you had a few other little areas as well, but it didn't feel as cool as the sandbox map in Halo 3, where you had a flat surface, you had a subterranean level, you had a skybox on top of that, and I felt like people had the ability to be more creative with that type of thing. With Forge World, I felt like it was definitely more limited in terms of that. And all of those things would have been fine if they had left Forge World maps out of matchmaking. I think that's what really got me the most, because you always had the same thing. Even though you were playing on a different map, it felt like the same map. It was always blue skies, green grass, and Forerunner structures. It never really felt like anything different or diverse. And that would have been different if they had added at least some interior structures into Forge World, but they didn't. So it always felt kind of mundane and repetitive. And just like with ripping maps from Campaign, it felt lazy. And lastly, we have Firefight Mode. Now, I loved Firefight in Halo 3 ODST. I was really excited to see that they were bringing it back for Halo Reach, but it just didn't strike the same note that ODST's Firefight did. It's really hard to pinpoint it exactly, because in both games you're only fighting Covenant. In both games they ripped the maps from Campaign, but I guess it was a combination of how the enemies fought you, the fact that you could turn on invincibility and it took the challenge out of it, and the maps just weren't as good. Like, ODST's Campaign had places where they could afford to do that. They could afford to take places from the Campaign and put them in Firefight, but Reach really only had like one, and that was the part on the package. And by the way, that's a mission I like, because something in there is named after me. Yes, the Covenant AA gun known as the Tyrant gun. So that's a little Easter egg for you right there. But again, the Firefight maps felt small, restrictive, the Covenant were overly aggressive, and to be honest with you, when 343 stepped in, to me, that was a massive improvement. You saw much larger Firefight maps. My favorite one is the one when you're on the original Halo ring. You have AIs actually helping you out, so you get allies helping you against the Covenant. That was awesome. I wish that hadn't been the last Firefight map that we'd seen for Halo Reach, because they could have used that concept going forward and just further improved on the concept. So now we get to the actual title of the video. You've already heard my personal opinion about the game itself, so why do I say it's overrated? The answer is pretty simple. Reach didn't really bring anything new or mind-blowing to the table. When you go back and you look at all the other Halo games, you look at Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2 and Halo 3, Combat Evolved was just a new thing in and of itself. It was a new way to play a first-person shooter. Halo 2 added vehicle hijacking, dual wielding, and Xbox Live compatibility. Halo 3 added 4-player online co-op, theater mode for both campaign and matchmaking. It added Forge mode for the first time. You had the Bungie.net file share that could also render your videos in real time on the site. And of course, it also added equipment. And once you loop Halo 3 ODST in there, it also added firefights. When you look at Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2, and Halo 3, the games continue to add features and things to each game without taking anything away from the predecessors. Halo Reach was the first Halo title to do exactly that. Not only did it take things away, but it went off in a completely different direction at times. First of all, it took dual wielding away, which I don't understand why they did that. It was never really a concept that was negatively received. I know some people didn't like it for multiplayer, but why take it away from campaign? The levels felt more scripted. They added armor abilities in, which a lot of people just flat out didn't like, and it didn't feel like Halo. And the fact they added matchmaking for campaign was fine, but to be honest with you, it really wasn't too difficult for me to find 3 friends to play with. Honestly, the best part about Reach is the fact that it took the best elements from Halo 3 and Halo 3 ODST and put them all into one. There was nothing groundbreaking that was added to Reach, and I feel like that was part of the problem right there. I had nothing to grasp, nothing that I could say, this belongs to Reach and only Reach. And I guess to me, that's what made it feel a lot less like a Halo game and more like a Call of Duty game. But all in all, I will say I really appreciated the ending. I like how it brought the whole Bungie saga to a full circle, and I gave the Pillar of Autumn a salute as I saw it drifting towards that impending ring of doom. I think overall, Reach is a fun game. If it's your favorite, that's great. I still enjoyed it, but it just wasn't as good as some of the other Halo content out there. Is it worth buying? Absolutely. You should definitely get Reach if you don't already have it, and to that end, I will say that Halo Reach is worth buying on sale. Halo 4. So before I get into this, as you probably guessed, this is part 3 in my review series, my extended review series of all of the Halo games from my least favorite to my most favorite. Halo 4 is the very first game built from scratch, from the ground up by 343 Industries. And I admire them for that because those are some pretty big shoes to fill for a very established franchise. And it's funny because now that the game's been out for so many years, it's fun going back and looking at reactions from reviewers versus the fan base at the time. Most reviewers were pretty friendly towards the game, saying that it felt like Halo and it was a good first try for 343 Industries. Fans were a bit more mixed up about it. They were getting that step-parent syndrome where it's a different company, so the new game's gotta suck. But looking back at it personally, from my point of view now, it's interesting how safe they played the game, and that's why it went over so well with reviewers. Believe it or not, it does draw a lot of comparisons to Halo Combat Evolved. I know what you're thinking, you're crazy, Tyrant, that's impossible, don't ever say that again. But yes, it's true when you go back and look at it. Look at just the Covenant for a second. They stick with what I call the 4 safe species: grunts, jackals, elites, and hunters. Personally, I think that was a really smart move. All the species that came after Combat Evolved never really felt like they got their footing in the Covenant. Let's take brutes for example. They're different in every single game. In Halo 2, they were basically bullet sponges that replaced the elites in later missions. In Halo 3, they were basically B versions of elites with their new power armor. And in Halo Reach, where I think they were implemented the best, is they're basically shock troops. But even then, they didn't feel like they had a solid place in the Covenant. They felt like they were their own thing, separate from the actual Covenant forces themselves. When it comes to drones, do I really need to say too much about these guys? They always slowed the game down. It basically just became an airborne shooting gallery. The one time I feel like they were implemented well in a Halo game was towards the end of Data Hive in one small section, and that was it. And as for skirmishers, they were basically off-brand jackals. Need I say more? So I thought that was a smart move on their part. Instead of putting in any controversial species, just stick to what people know is good. But even the setting draws some serious parallels to Combat Evolved. And I know what you're thinking, impossible, but let me break this down for you. The game starts out with Master Chief in a cryotube aboard a ship that's near a Forerunner installation. The Master Chief has to fight his way through the Covenant forces to get off the ship and to land on the actual Forerunner installation and start Mission 2. Mission 3 rolls around and it's kind of a nighttime mission with a lot of alien tech involved. Mission 4 is a larger mission where you have a big group of Marines fighting the aliens with you. Mission 5 is an even bigger mission where you get to drive a Scorpion tank. And for the rest of both games, you're trying to stop a third faction from escaping and destroying humanity. Yeah, it's kind of eerie when you think about it. Speaking of that third faction, we get to see an actual Forerunner in this game for the first time. It's pretty cool because in every Halo game up until this, we've heard about the Forerunners, we've heard how ancient they are, all their tech, how powerful, how godly, and now we really do get to see one. Of course, I'm talking about the Didact. I was a little disappointed that the Didact's concept was spoiled before launch, but you know, spoilers, what are you gonna do? I really thought that would have been a cool surprise, but I don't blame 343 for that one. Although to be fair, they did drop some hints, so shame on you, 343. This is really the first time in a Halo game where the Master Chief has had a true nemesis. You could argue Truth, but at the same time, that was really Arbiter's nemesis. And Gravemind was really everybody's nemesis. He has some of the best lines of dialogue I've heard from a villain in the Halo franchise. I mean, check this out.
Time was your ally, human. But now it has abandoned you. The Forerunners have returned. This tomb is now yours.
The guy not only seems intelligent and intimidating, but he's downright scary. And more so since he apparently has these force powers too, he seems unstoppable, invincible. And through the Didact and his ghost wife, the Librarian, you hear a lot of backstory about humanity and how it used to be once as powerful as the Forerunners. There was a huge war between humanity and the Forerunners, but humanity was also fighting the Flood at the same time, and when the Forerunners finally defeated humanity, they had to pick up the pieces and then fight the Flood, and that's part of the reason they lost, because they were exhausted from the other war that they had. Now you at least know why such a powerful race lost to the Flood. Yeah, I know it kind of felt like they were retconning human history a little bit, but at the same time, it was an interesting piece of lore and a nice piece of information to add to the Halo franchise. Basically making Halo a lot deeper than you thought it was. But since we're talking about the Forerunners, we really do need to address the elephant in the room on this one. For the first time since Halo Combat Evolved, 343 Industries added a brand new faction to the Halo franchise. Of course, I'm talking about the Prometheans. I'm gonna come out and say it, I really respected the synergy that the three races that made up the Prometheans had with each other. You had the base unit, the crawlers that were basically spawned in by the Watchers which were a support unit that supported the other Prometheans, were spawned in by the Promethean Knights. But hold on, we gotta break this down for a second and analyze all the species that made up the Promethean faction. The way the crawlers were presented in Halo 4 were kind of annoying. They always showed up in mass. Basically, they were like a ground version of the drone army. They were annoying to fight, they slowed the game down, and really just didn't seem to be much of a purpose other than cannon fodder, even more so than the grunts. People tell me they hate the Watchers the most because they act as a support unit and basically just make all the other units on the field much harder to fight. They can spawn in crawlers and chuck your own grenades back at you. Thinking of this though, I actually respect the Watchers because I always thought that's how drones were supposed to be in original games until they made them just mass shooting galleries. So I did appreciate them for that, but not for the fact they were a little too supportive of the other units and made them that much more difficult to kill. And speaking of difficult to kill, the Promethean Knights. Oh my god, how overpowered can a base unit be? They're even larger than hunters. In fact, there's a video out on the internet right now, I swear to it, of Promethean Knights going up against hunters, and the Promethean Knights win. Check this out. You have a hulking enemy that has shields like elites, can't be headshotted because of their faceplates like the brutes. They can wield any weapon in the Promethean arsenal, including the two most powerful weapons like the binary rifle, which arguably shouldn't have even been in the game to begin with, and the most powerful weapon of all, the incineration cannon, which is like a rocket launcher with crazy ass splash damage. They can even teleport anywhere they want to at will. On top of that, they have these superpowers like warp rushing and this weird shockwave ability that throws you off of platforms. And even if you manage to kill a Promethean Knight, if there's a Watcher even remotely close by, it can resurrect the Knight. I'm not discounting the Knights from the series entirely, I just don't feel like they should have been in the game as much as they were. They would have been much better off as mini bosses, sort of like the Hunters. But no, these guys are everywhere in the game. In fact, if you look at the mission Infinity, the only way we were able to beat that on Mythic difficulty, particularly when it comes to that section where you have to unlock the door, basically my Mythic community had to figure out where all the Prometheans spawn so we could basically get a head start. Because on Mythic, the only way you can really safely kill a Promethean Knight is wait till he launches a grenade at you, then while he's stuck in the animation, run around behind him and assassinate him. And even then, you have to hit him at just the right spot. But overall, they still were an interesting faction to add to the game itself, and they were something new and unique to fight. Moving on to the story's narrative, it showed a more human side of the Master Chief and his relationship with Cortana. I felt a little odd about that because basically Master Chief was a faceless super soldier up until now. All of a sudden, he has feelings. At the same time, though, you can't really blame him because his best friend for 8 years, Cortana, is going through rampancy, is going to die soon. So you feel for the Master Chief and Cortana, you understand what they're going through, and it's kind of cool to see this side of it. And this goes all the way up to the end of the campaign. If you don't know the ending yet, I'm sorry, I'm gonna spoil it for you because the game is 5 years old at this point, so if you haven't seen it yet, stop the video now, go check it out on YouTube, or just buy the game. While Cortana is going through rampancy and they're aboard the Didac ship, she sacrifices herself to save the Master Chief. She's fragmenting herself into different parts, and there's one part that survives and helps Master Chief get off the Didac ship before the nuclear bomb goes off.
Cortana. Cortana, do you read? Cortana, come in. How?
Oh, I'm the strangest thing you've seen all day?
But if we're here...
It worked. You did it. Just like you always do.
So how do we get out of here?
I'm not coming with you this time.
What?
Most of me is down there. I only held enough back to get you off the ship.
No. That's not... We go together.
It's already done.
I am not leaving you here.
John. I've waited so long to do that.
It was my job to take care of you.
We were supposed to take care of each other. And we did.
Cortana, please. Wait.
Welcome home, John.
This was hard to watch. It was very heart-wrenching, and this was probably the only time in a video game where I shed a tear. And to be honest with you, if they had stopped the Halo franchise there story-wise, I would have been completely satisfied. That was a great follow-up to Halo 3 and a good way to bring the Master Chief story to a close along with Cortana's. But you just couldn't do that, could you? Talking about other elements of the campaign, the graphics are still to this day the best I've ever seen on the 360. They even had Conan O'Brien drooling over Cortana. Not that I blame him. And the music, even though it wasn't by the legendary Marty O'Donnell, it was still excellent. I enjoyed how it ramped up, it matched with the action perfectly, and overall it was an excellent score and one I bought the soundtrack to. Moving on from campaign, we need to talk about multiplayer a bit. Now this is really the first comparison I draw to Halo Reach because like with Reach, I didn't really give a shit about the multiplayer. There was nothing overly special about it, and I kind of felt bad thinking that way because it includes one of my favorite new vehicles from the Halo franchise, and that's the Mantis. That's right, we now have a Halo mech. Although to be fair, I will say that I did enjoy the new infection mode where when you become a zombie, you actually become a flood combat form. That was awesome. The maps weren't anything new or exciting for me. The Forge, yeah, that might have been a little better, but that really didn't help with the actual overall multiplayer situation. And to tell you the truth, to me, it wasn't just the fact that the maps weren't very memorable, it was also the weapons sandbox. In previous videos, I told you that I was always annoyed with the concept of covenant equivalents to human weapons because they're aliens, they should be different and more powerful than just what simple humans have. But now that the Prometheans have also been added to the game, they added a third weapon sandbox that's just another duplicate of the other two. Difference is the weapons are also more powerful than them, which is kind of what I was aiming for to begin with, but they're also too similar. Case in point, the light rifle, it's more powerful than any of the other mid-range weapons out there and basically has the best of all their worlds. Now seriously, check this out. Unzoomed, it fires 3 rounds like the battle rifle. Zoomed in, it fires 1 powerful shot like the DMR, and like the carbine, it's also effective against shields. If you have the light rifle available, why wouldn't you pick that up over anything else? It's basically a mid-range power weapon. The incineration cannon is far better than the rocket launcher because not only is it very powerful and can vaporize the enemies, but even has splash damage that can also vaporize the enemies as well. And the binary rifle basically turns the player into a Halo 2 Jackal sniper. Now you can hit your enemy anywhere on the body and one-shot them. Oh, and they turn into molten dust too. That's a nice touch, 343. But honestly, the biggest thing that annoyed me with Halo 4 is they did the one thing that I can't stand to ever see happen to a Halo game, and that's them taking out features that were once previously established, or at least not negatively received, and just ripping them from the game entirely. The first major one is Firefight. This started in Halo 3, and then in Halo Reach, 343 added their own touch to it and did a good job with it. One of my favorite maps they did was that one on Installation 04 where you have allies showing up to help you out. It was the first time we saw that concept in Halo Firefight, and I wish it wasn't the last map that we'd ever seen for Firefight. You can argue they replaced it with Spartan Ops, and I kind of like Spartan Ops in the sense that it's like an extra campaign mixed with Firefight with objectives, but I would have preferred to have the choice between standard Firefight and Firefight with objectives, not forced into something different entirely. And another thing they removed was Theater Mode for Campaign. Theater Mode for Campaign was one of my favorite features that they added to Halo way back in Halo 3, and I loved it because I got to go back and actually see the mistakes I made when I died, or at least glorify the victories that I had. And to me, that's a pretty important feature to have because some people I know love to do walkthroughs for Halo campaigns. It could have been an issue with how powerful the graphics were compared to previous Halo games, but I would have rather them taken more time and implemented that in just so you had that extra feature available to those who actually do utilize it. Just something to keep in mind for future reference, 343 Industries. However, at the end of the day, despite all my criticisms, Halo 4 was a pretty solid game. It had fun gameplay, it had a great story, it had superior graphics, and even great music. Oftentimes, me and a few other community members basically refer to Halo 4 as Reach 2.0, and I say that because it does carry over some features that were in Halo Reach, like non-speaking Covenant, sprint, and armor abilities. The difference is with Halo 4, armor abilities felt more organic and not shoehorned in there like they were just thrown into a case somewhere in the level. And also, like with Reach, I didn't care about the multiplayer. That's basically why I typically rank these two games so close together, and people have their own opinions, and you're certainly entitled to your own, but in my opinion, in terms of both story and gameplay, Halo 4 did a slightly better job than Reach. Overall, I really enjoyed the story, I enjoyed the expanded Halo lore, I enjoyed seeing a different side of both Master Chief and Cortana. And once again, to me, the story was so satisfying that if they had stopped it right there, that could have been a perfect ending to Master Chief's story arc. Oh well. Maybe Halo 6. It's a game I still enjoy playing to this very day. It's a story that continues to stick with me, and for that, I will say that Halo 4 is absolutely worth buying at full price.
Halo 5 Guardians. When you hear the name of this Halo title, what comes to mind? What feelings does it bring to light? Interestingly enough, if you ask enough people, you'll get a wide range of answers spanning from great all the way to abomination. It's easily one of the most divisive Halo titles to be released, and today I'd like to dive further into it and why it ranks so high on my list of Halo games despite its major flaws. Now, before I continue, I have to remind folks that these are just my opinions. You don't have to agree with me, and I'm expecting many of you not to. I do ask, however, that we try to keep things civil and keep the conversation going. Yes, I realize that asking people to be civil on the internet is like asking a cat to behave, but I do genuinely want to hear well thought out comments and opinions in the comments section below. So, before we get to the good, we do have to address the elephant in the room, and that is the disaster of a launch the game really was. We'll get into the campaign itself in a bit, but for now, let's talk about the game when it launched, as it's quite different from what it is today. A bare-bones release may be the least insulting thing I can say about the state of the game back in 2015. The campaign itself had a lot of major issues, and this might be something that could be at least slightly glossed over if the game had a lot more to offer. Instead, the only other thing we had to entertain ourselves was the multiplayer, including Warzone. No Forge, no Firefight, no Firefight equivalent, no Spartan Ops, no nothing. This is easily the most lackluster release since the days before Halo 3, which again wouldn't be so bad if the campaign had knocked it out of the park. Instead, we were given a lackluster story with barely any time spent with the Master Chief on his own personal journey. And with that, let's talk about the campaign. To be blunt, it sounds like they were trying to go the Terminator Genesis route. Lots of ideas that could have easily spanned multiple media releases, but instead were crammed all into one disjointed title. The first mission alone is a head-scratcher. After a cutscene that seemed like it was ripped straight from Avengers Age of Ultron, we find ourselves on Kamchatka in pursuit of Dr. Catherine Halsey and her captor, Jul 'Mdama. If you're lost as to why we're here at all, I can't say that I blame you. I guess this mission was meant to serve as a conclusion to the Spartan Ops campaign, but it's just so stupidly wrong in every fashion, it boggles the mind. First off, we're playing as Fireteam Osiris, and unless you've read the books and watched the movie Nightfall, you're going to be completely lost as to who any of these characters are, with maybe the exception of Edward Buck, who is now currently a Spartan rather than an ODST. Other than that, we're really given no backstory on who these characters are and why we're playing as them for this mission instead of the Master Chief, icon of the series. We feel absolutely no connection to these characters, and the one character we might be able to empathize with is playing second fiddle to Luke Cage. Once the mission concludes, we kill Jul 'Mdama, the current supreme leader of the Covenant, in an anticlimactic cutscene and save the Doctor. That's right, the big bad goes down in the first mission. The sad thing is, this really could have been the main antagonist for the game. The Covenant have been the main nemesis for the UNSC since Game 1. And being on the hunt for him along with Halsey as the Master Chief would have been a great plot worthy of a two-parter. Instead, he goes down in Mission 1. What really bugs me here is that this mission really doesn't connect with the rest of the game. Why is anyone on Kamchatka to begin with? Why is Halsey there? Why are the Prometheans attacking? As far as we know, there's no Guardian on the planet, or at least if there is, it's never mentioned. So what's the point? The next mission, where we finally get to play as the Master Chief, is even more distant from the main plot of the overall campaign. We find ourselves on an abandoned space station called Argent Moon, where we have to fend off its assets from the Covenant. So what happens? We end up blowing up this space station as well as all its experimental ships, and it's never mentioned again, not once. The one important plot device that happens here is that Master Chief has some sort of magical vision of Cortana still being alive and decides to go find her, which seems very uncharacteristic for our hero-in-chief. Okay, whatever. Poor start to the game, but the next mission is where the plot actually begins to unfold when we travel to the rather ugly world of Meridian. Only it's not with a Master Chief, but rather with Fireteam Osiris. And for the next several missions, you'll only be fighting against Prometheans. There is no Covenant anywhere to be found. In the middle of these missions, things finally come to a head between the Master Chief and Spartan Locke via a Spartan cat fight presented in a cutscene. It's here where I need to veer off for a moment and address the marketing of the game, which focused heavily on the rivalry between these two Spartans. This was the buildup that many Halo fans had been waiting for, yet after all that hype, this is what we got. A brief CGI battle between the two Spartans before they kiss and make up later in the game over one of the most questionable things 343 has done in the lore of Halo: make Cortana the bad guy. It doesn't make much sense either, given that the main antagonist we fight multiple times throughout the campaign is Ultron impersonator the Warden Eternal. Yet somehow we find out that it's all just a ruse. He's actually some sort of bodyguard for Cortana, a frenemy, if you will, and Cortana is the one controlling all the Guardians. And when do we find all this out? The second to last mission in the game. It's also worth noting here that this is the Master Chief's third and final mission in the entire game. 3 out of 15 missions. Both Master Chief and Blue Team deserve better than that. Unless you've paid attention to the outside lore, we have no idea where Blue Team has been all this time, and where they were while the Master Chief was busy being the big hero in the original Halo trilogy. None of this is explained in-game. We do get a brief moment of exposition telling us that Blue Team grew up together, but in my opinion, this raises more questions than answers. The game also manages to shoehorn the Arbiter into the campaign. You remember that guy, right? Sure. We haven't heard from him since Halo 3, but why not? Why not add even more characters to this overcrowded cast? That's right, there are nearly 20 different main characters in this game, and we barely have time to get to know any of them or their motivations. And then when things finally start to get interesting with the Cortana dynamic, the game comes to a screeching to-be-continued halt. This may very well be the most undeserving to-be-continued in the history of video games. Contrast this with Halo 2's epic story and excellent character development, and Halo 5 just completely falls flat. The Arbiter's journey in Halo 2 is nothing short of a masterpiece, as he goes from human-hating genocidal general to ultimately siding with the humans to stop galactic annihilation. The Arbiter from Halo 2 is a memorable character that we'll remember for ages. Spartan Locke is not. Plain and simple. Locke is no different at the end of the game than he was at the beginning. This is not character development, it's lazy writing at its finest. What would I have done differently? Divide Halo 5 into 2 separate games, Halo 5 and Halo 5 Guardians. Halo 5 would have featured the Master Chief reuniting with the rest of Blue Team on their quest to save Dr. Halsey from Jewel Abdama. Their journey would have ultimately taken them to the planet Genesis, where ultimately they discover that Cortana is in fact very much still alive. End the game on that note and pick up with Fireteam Osiris in Halo 5 Guardians, where the Forerunner events and the rise of the Guardians become the central plot. The missions would play largely out the same, save for the fight between Chief and Locke, and the to-be-continued would feel more earned rather than wasted. So I just spent all this time discussing what I hated about the game, yet it still ranks this high up in my list of favorite games. How could that possibly be? Well, this goes back to what I said in previous videos. If I were ranking these games solely based on the story element, the list would be very different. Halo 5 would be dead last without question. But a good story is not what I look for in a good video game. Sure, it's always a massive bonus to have a story that's both compelling and intriguing, but it's not the defining factor for me. This goes back to the classic days of iconic games like Super Mario Bros. And the original Zelda. Sure, there's technically a story there, but it's pretty straightforward. Fight monsters, save the princess, and call it a day. That's basically it. Yet for me, despite there not being much story to tell, I still rate Super Mario Bros. 3 as one of my favorite games of all time. In short, you don't need to have a great story to have a great video game. I'd rather have a game with satisfying gameplay with a lackluster story than a game with a first-rate story but crappy gameplay. You might feel differently about that, and that's totally cool. That's your right, and you should feel free to own it. But for me, the gameplay matters more, and for me, this is where Halo 5 starts to shine. Let's start with the squad system. While the AI could have been certainly better, I love this never play alone direction that Microsoft seems to be going. One of the first main things that attracted me to the original Halo game was being able to fight alongside a squad of Marines. Granted, you couldn't do this all the time, resulting in eerie missions like the library, But I still have fond memories charging up the beach of the Silent Cartographer, or boarding the Truth and Reconciliation for the first time with my own personal squad of funny and charismatic Marines. To me, that's a major highlight of the squad system, always having a team there to support you no matter how dire the situation becomes. Again, the squad system needs improvement, and in the future, I'd like the ability to choose my own squad mates, but I get what they're going for here, and I can appreciate it at least for that. The ability to direct your team to pick up certain weapons, attack certain enemies, and even revive you in combat, I think also adds a new and entertaining dynamic to the game, and admittedly, it's one that I miss when playing previous Halo titles. I don't expect everyone to feel this way, but at least for me, it added a certain depth to the strategies that I used on the battlefield. Now let's talk about the major elephant in the room, the one that seems to divide the community the most: enhanced mobility. In previous videos, I've noted that Halo Reach was the first Halo game to really kick off this trend with the inclusion of armor abilities. This had very mixed reactions from the Halo community, especially with the addition of Armor Lock. Still, this would be a concept that would carry over into Halo 4. For me at least, the armor abilities in Halo 4 felt more organic to the gameplay, but at the same time, they still felt rather jarring on the battlefield, particularly in multiplayer with the addition of loadouts. Sprint was no longer bound by a particular armor ability, but rather became a core feature. Again, the concept of Sprint is one I could take or leave. With many modern first-person shooters adopting the concept, at least to some extent it made sense to include it in some way, shape, or form in Halo. Like with the squad concept, I found myself at least partially missing this when playing older Halo titles. I'm not saying it's better, but I am saying that it gives the player more options when it comes to how you operate on the battlefield. In Halo 5, Sprint became infinite rather than based on a timer. If I had to choose between Sprint with or without a timer, it would be without. It's one less thing I have to worry about when I'm on the go. And this brings us to the fact that Halo 5 nixed armor abilities entirely in place of enhanced mobility. Multiplayer was back to fresh, even start, so even if you're one who prefers zero enhanced mobility, at the very least you no longer had to worry about that special and unique armor ability that your opponent had up his or her sleeve. What I like about the remaining enhanced mobilities is the ideology of promoting vertical gameplay in addition to horizontal, adding a brand new dynamic to the battlefield without the use of jetpacks. This is where missions like Swords of Sanghelios tend to shine, as they are specifically designed with these ideas in mind. If I had to give any major credit to the campaign, it's the sheer size of the missions in which you play. Sure, they're still fairly linear compared to some of the missions from the original Halo, but they still give you numerous options on how you can get from point A to point B. For me at least, that promotes replayability, which in turn gives the game more longevity. I still understand why there's a major pushback on enhanced mobility though. If you're asking me if I can play Halo Combat Evolved and Halo 5 and say they feel the same, I can tell you outright that they don't. Not even remotely close. But I also can't say that the mechanics from either game are necessarily better than the other. The mechanics of each respective game fits the tone in which they were designed. Halo CE wouldn't work with enhanced mobility, whereas Halo 5 wouldn't really work well without it. They're two completely different games with two completely different styles of gameplay. When I look back on all the Halo titles, it's interesting to see how each game has evolved or changed from the previous one. Halo 2, for example, added both dual wielding as well as vehicle hijacking. Halo 3 added equipment. Halo Reach added armor abilities. Halo 4 added permanent sprint, and Halo 5 added infinite sprint while also swapping out armor abilities for enhanced mobility. Each game has evolved in some way from its predecessor, even though some changes have been more jarring than others. So in some ways I understand why so many people dislike the modern take on Halo. Does it feel like the original? Well, no, but that's the thing. If I'm in the mood for playing Halo with its original mechanics, I still can. I can start up Halo 3 or Halo 3 in the Master Chief Collection and play Halo the way I remember it. Halo 5 is a different game, and I expect it to be different rather than just be a carbon copy of the games that came before it. Those older games will still be there if I want to play them, as will be Halo 5. I personally like a little variety in my gameplay experiences. Speaking of variety, let's shift away from enhanced mobility and revisit some of the other aspects of the campaign, more specifically the Prometheans. If you remember what I said about them in Halo 4, you'll note that my memories of them were far from fond. The crawlers seem to slow the game down to a grinding halt, much like the drones in earlier Halo titles. The Watchers were annoying as hell, and the Knights were way too overpowered, even able to take down Hunters. So how do the Prometheans fare at Halo 5? Surprisingly, they're much more fleshed out and balanced, which is a good thing considering how often we fight against them. The crawlers this time around don't appear in mass so much as scattered cannon fodder, similar to grunts and jackals of the Covenant, at least in most instances. The Watchers have been scaled back to less powerful aerial support units, which is how I always pictured the drones, or at least how I thought the drones should have been in previous Halo titles, and the Knights have been made significantly less powerful. They can no longer teleport, their special abilities have been scaled back, they appear far less often, and now they have weak spots to make them easier to kill. But the major standout here is the latest addition of the Promethean ranks, the Promethean Soldier. There's now a middleman ranking system between the crawlers and the Knights that comes off as being somewhat of a combination of the Covenant Jackal and the Elite. While I'll openly admit that their phase teleporting gets old real fast, it is admittedly a decent middle ground for the Promethean forces. I also appreciate how they've tweaked some of the Promethean weapons this time around. Both the bolt shot and the suppressor now have added tracking to their projectiles, making them stand out more from their other in-game counterparts. The binary rifle now feels more like the focus rifle from Halo Reach rather than just another run-of-the-mill sniper rifle, and the incineration cannon now has two separate firing modes, one of which has mortar capabilities similar to the fuel rod cannon from Halo PC. However, I personally think that the multiplayer and Forge were the two things to see the most improvement. I'm a big fan of both Warzone and Warzone Firefight in general. I love the ideology of not only having up to 24 players on the battlefield all at once, but also having the addition of AI objectives is a total blast, and something I've wanted since Halo Combat Evolved. Combined with the 60 frames per second, this is the most fun I've had in Halo multiplayer since Halo 3, and that's saying something. Forge mode is quite an accomplishment too. While I do have to take points off for waiting an entire year to introduce it to the game, the customization options are near limitless, and Forge crafters can now recreate all of their old favorite Halo maps from the ground up with a level of detail we have yet to see with any other major Halo title. So at the end of the day, what does all this mean? Is Halo 5 perfect? No, not by a long shot. But I do consider it to be a vast improvement over what came before it in terms of 343's Halo titles. The campaign story is a major setback. It's easily the worst story I've encountered out of all the Halo games, period. And that's just depressing, especially considering that Halo in general is typically known for its strong storytelling and memorable characters. They definitely tried to borrow elements from Halo 2, but they borrowed all the wrong elements. Halo 2 had one of the best stories, if not the best story in the entire franchise. Had they looked closer at what made the story of Halo 2 so epic in the first place, Halo 5 might rank higher on this list. But regardless of how bad the story is, the gameplay, at least to me, is pretty solid. I'm glad armor abilities are now a thing of the past with Halo 5, and I realize that there are a lot of people out there that disagree with me when it comes to enhanced mobility, but I also get why it's there. It's an attempt to bring Halo into the modern world of FPS. Whether or not that's a good or bad thing is completely up to you. While I agree that it feels vastly different than what we all know and love from the original Halo trilogy, I still prefer the current iteration to armor abilities. But again, that's just my own personal opinion. Warzone is also a complete and total blast, and Forge mode allows for almost unlimited potential when it comes to creativity and map design. For that, I have to say that for me, Halo 5 Guardians in its current state is worth buying at full price. Halo Combat Evolved, the game that launched a legion of fans. What is your first happy memory when you think of this game? For many, it's the game that started it all and made Xbox what it is today. I still remember the first time I set foot on that vastly open and massive ring world. Admittedly, there aren't too many games out there that have had that sort of impact on me. The first time I heard about the game, I was skeptical. Sure, I'd played numerous first-person shooters in the past like Doom and Quake, but as much as I enjoyed them, there was still something repetitive in nature with them. I'd have fun playing one or the other for a few hours, but then I would take a break, and it could be for weeks at a time, and I wouldn't even give it a second thought. Not Halo. Not Bungie's masterpiece of a game. I remember the first time I climbed up on top of a Forerunner structure while myself and a group of Marines fought off dozens of Covenant soldiers as they descended from the sky in their powerful and menacing dropships. It even reminded me a little of that Starship Trooper scene where the arachnids were all swarming on the base that the humans were left to defend. The Marines are one of the first things that drew me to this game. In games like Doom and Quake, it was just you versus the rest of the world. The first game I ever played that had allies fighting by your side was a little Macintosh game known as Ice and Fire. But even there, your soldiers were just generic fighting machines. Not with Halo. The Marines in Halo may be one of the most iconic features of the original game. Each Marine had his own personality. What really stands out is the number of different accents you can hear as you play. This is the United Nations Space Command after all, so you should expect to find fighters of multiple backgrounds, and it really does make the concept of the UNSC come alive. And some of their hilarious quotes still stick with me to this day and literally make me laugh out loud.
What? There's no Covenant here. Think maybe nobody's home. Nice shot! There it is! Contact! Lots of contact! No Covenant. You had to open your mouth. Oh man, we're trapped in here! We're screwed! We're screwed, man!
But of course, as fun as the Marines are in this game, it wouldn't be nearly as good if the enemies we were facing weren't as equally incredible. Of course, I'm talking about the Covenant. Whereas most first-person shooters opted to have several different types of independent monsters you had to face during encounters, the Covenant had only 4 different types of enemies, but they all worked well equally together to battle against you and your Marines. You had the Grunt serving as basic cannon fodder with their hilarious remarks. You have the Jackal serving as slightly stronger support units. You have the powerful elites that would lead their troops into battle. And you have the Juggernaut-esque Hunters serving as mini-bosses on the battlefield. That's right, Halo doesn't have bosses, but rather it has boss-like encounters that don't break the overall flow and immersion of the game. That is one of the major standouts of Halo's encounters right there. It always feels organic rather than scripted. You might have the same number of enemies on the battlefield at any given time, but what they do and how they react to you and your allies always changes. Every encounter you play plays out differently every time. I remember spending hours playing Assault on the Control Room just seeing how many different ways I could win a battle. How many other games at the time offered this much replayability? And it wasn't just the Covenant themselves, but also the vehicles they drove. The Ghost felt like if a motorcycle had been given plasma cannons and hover capabilities, while you could also take to the skies in a Covenant Banshee and rain fuel rod hellfire down on your opponents. On the human side, you were given the iconic Warthog, the ultimate all-terrain vehicle with a massive 50 caliber chain gun to mow down any Covenant that stood in your way. And for the ultimate battle experience, you could also commandeer a gigantic Scorpion tank and crush everything that tried to challenge you. The vehicle palette may have been simple in Halo, but it was definitely enough to get the job done. Speaking of simplicity, let's talk about the various weapons that Halo has to offer. While the original game might have the smallest sandbox, it also has the most diverse set of weapons in the series. Games that followed tend to duplicate weapons for the various factions, but not in the original. Each weapon serves its own purpose and has its own special functionality. You have the assault rifle as your standard automatic ballistic weapon. You have your sidearm, which also may be the most powerful, overpowered pistol in any Halo title. You have your standard shotgun for close-range combat, the sniper rifle for taking out enemies from afar, and of course, the rocket launcher to go up against vehicles, hunters, and clusters of various enemies. But it wouldn't be a complete sandbox without adding in the alien weapons as well. The plasma pistol is the most basic of Covenant weapons, but utilizing its overcharged functionality could take out enemy shielding in an instant. The plasma rifle utilizes an automatic function that can also stun your enemies as you pepper them with plasma. And even the Needler, when used correctly, can serve as a type of homing grenade launcher. Even the two newest additions that were added in Halo PC were unique. You had the fuel rod cannon for mortar-based combat, as well as the flamethrower so you could torch your enemies. Everything the Halo sandbox always had to offer felt like it had its own place and did something that none of the other weapons could. This is the one thing to this day that remains unique to the original title. But what made Halo truly stand out for its time was its story. Few first-person shooters back then had a real story that was more complex other than kill the monsters, save who you needed to save, and call it a day. Not with Halo. Halo had an enriching science fiction story that, in my opinion, is still one of the best in the series to date, maybe even of all time. Bungie wastes no time in diving headfirst into the action. As soon as the game starts up, you find yourself aboard the UNSC ship the Pillar of Autumn, drifting towards a massive, unknown ring structure with the Covenant right on your tail. You can feel the sense of urgency in both the captain and the crew, while the ship's AI Cortana boasts the confidence to deal with the alien threat. The tutorial you're given as you find yourself in the shoes of the Master Chief for the first time feels organic to the in-game experience and not like it was simply shoehorned in there for the player's benefit. After you've completed the tutorial for the first time, you hear the sounds of the Covenant banging down the door until it gives way, and the Covenant elite charges in and slays one of your fellow crew members. You can feel the intensity of the scenario as you make your way through the massive vessel, and the Covenant continue to press the attack both on board the ship as well as outside. Then, when you finally make your daring escape to the surface of the mysterious ring world, your adventure really begins. I still remember boarding the Covenant ship for the first time to save Captain Keyes, and my jaw just dropping to the floor at all of the alien scenery. Everything looked so polished and different from everything we had seen before. As the missions go on, you're introduced to more enemies and more combat scenarios that always feel new and challenging, while also feeling both fair and balanced. Each scenario always has multiple options for the player to approach, and you never feel like you're forced into fighting just one way. Again, this is where Halo stands out among its competitors. This is what a semi-open world first-person shooter should feel like. Then you reach the halfway point of the game. The Covenant are scared. As you move through the derelict Forerunner facility, you notice dead Covenant that weren't taken out by you. You come across a terrified Marine that can't tell you from friend or foe. Even the Covenant seem to be frightened and on edge. You come across one of your dead allies and play back his encounter. Then you see them for the first time. The Flood. This is hands down one of the biggest video game twists in history that I can remember. I remember feeling that sudden rush of fear and dread as the doors of the facility begin to crumble and collapse and hordes of Flood begin beelining it right for you. This was completely different than anything the game had thrown at you before. Not just slightly different, not just a new type of combat. This was a complete 180 that made you rethink how you had to play the game. You had three basic types of Flood to deal with. The legions of infection forms that would swarm you from all directions, the carrier forms that would waddle towards you and explode while also spitting out even more infection forms, and of course, you had the combat forms capable of running at great speeds, jumping at great heights, utilizing powerful melee attacks, and wielding all weapons, both human and Covenant alike, and yes, that includes the devastating rocket launcher. You meet a bubbly little orb friend that at first seems like he's there to help you, but after trudging through the treacherous library, you learn of the Monitor's true intent. Then, he turns his sentinels on you too, effectively creating three factions that are now all out to get you as well as each other. This was the first time I'd ever seen Team AI versus Team AI combat in any game, which opened up the possibilities for endless combat. You now had more options on which fights you could engage and which ones you could at least try to avoid. And you're doing all this as Halo's incredible musical score by Marty O'Donnell is completely rocking you senseless. It's hard to deny just how excellent the music is in this game. Every track, even the ambience in the swamps or the gentle hum of the Covenant ship are memorable scores that stick with you for the ages. So much love and care went into crafting each and every musical piece that it officially became the very first video game soundtrack that I'd ever purchased. That was one of the downsides that came to playing the game's multiplayer. Without the music of the campaign, it felt almost hollow and empty. Fortunately, the incredible map design and simple two-gun plus grenades gameplay are so good, you forget about it within the first few seconds. The combat this game has to offer is simply astounding. The two-gun design forces you to choose your weapons carefully while weighing each one's strengths and weaknesses. Even the grenades are unique, as one type allows for a bigger boom, while the other can stick directly to your enemies. Combined with the iconic map designs of places like Blood Gulch, Sidewinder, and Battle Creek, and you have a recipe for success. Throughout this piece, I've been trying really hard just to think of one negative aspect about this game, and it's nearly impossible. Everything about it looks and feels so perfect. If I had to pick something, and I mean I'm really trying here, it's that it doesn't include the features of some of the games that came after it. But that's hardly a weakness, as Halo is the game that started it all and was the basis for all great things to come for the series in the future. And because of all that, it's no doubt in my mind that Halo Combat Evolved is absolutely a collector's item. Halo 3, the game that finally allowed us to finish the fight. Quiet, you! How do you even begin to talk about a game as momentous as this one? Did you start with the epic campaign? Or how about the engaging multiplayer? Or maybe it's the infinite possibilities of the newly introduced theater mode, or even the creative machinimas that blossom thanks to the game's perfect integration of theater mode. It really is quite hard to pick and choose when there's so much to choose from, but if I had to choose one thing that I was looking forward to prior to Halo 3's release, it was finally being able to finish the fight. Not just the battles we fought in Halo 2, but going all the way back to when we first planted our boots on the monumental Installation 04. For many, Halo 3 was the pinnacle of Halo's greatness. It's the fastest selling video game ever, and in only a matter of months, it sold more than 8 million copies around the world. People were eager to finish the fight, and Bungie did not disappoint. The game starts you out by placing you back in the shoes of the Master Chief with a shaky alliance between you and the other hero of Halo 2, the Arbiter. You find yourself in the crisp jungles of Africa while being hunted by the newly armored brutes, their distant howls sending shivers down your spine. Then it happens. The mighty Sergeant Johnson is captured, and standing between you and his rescue is a formidable brute chieftain and a small army of Covenant. Upon his rescue, you learn of the underground bunker known as the Crow's Nest, but so do the Covenant. After a daring escape, the world begins to open up around you as you traverse the vast savannas of Savo Highway. Then you see it. The swirling vortex in the sky off in the distance with the Prophet of Truth's Forerunner ship planted directly in the center of a giant alien superstructure. It's your job to save the galaxy from annihilation, but you aren't quick enough as Truth activates the portal and begins his journey into the awe-inspiring Ark.
All ships, fire at will.
This is the way the world ends.
To light the remaining Halo rings and wipe out life on a galactic scale. But everything comes to a head when the flood-infested High Charity plummets from the sky and crashes headfirst into the Ark, transforming the scenario into a three-way war between the Covenant, the Flood, and you. Halo 3's campaign managed to hit all the right notes when it came to its semi-open world gameplay by reintroducing vast environments full of obstacles and enemies. This included the titanic boss fights with scarabs that, unlike in Halo 2, had a mind of their own along with a crew of deadly enemies. Nothing felt more satisfying than seeing one explode in a granular spectacle of fire and light.
I'm gonna take your head home in a jar!
Both scarabs down. Well done.
This scarab was a boss battle done right, similar to the way that hunters felt in the original Halo Combat Evolved. Bungie had learned its lesson from the universe-breaking encounters in Halo 2, and were able to seamlessly integrate these colossal creatures into the game in a way that was both challenging and memorable without seeming forced or out of place. But Bungie wasn't done impressing us with just how they constructed the campaign. Prior to Halo 3, the concept of online co-op within the franchise was considered to be inconceivable. But not only did Bungie conquer this feat, they even upped the co-op from 2 to 4 players, and each player was unique rather than being just another carbon copy Spartan. I still remember logging onto Xbox Live every single night and playing the campaign with 3 other friends as we did our best to become the first people in the world to beat the campaign on Legendary with all skulls on without anyone on the team dying. However, the campaign wasn't all that Halo 3 had to offer. The multiplayer was as engaging as ever with epic maps like Guardian, Construct, Last Resort, High Ground, and Valhalla, with even more maps to come in later DLC like Blackout and my all-time favorite Halo map, Avalanche. Every map felt engaging and could be played over and over again without it ever getting old. And even if the maps did start to age on you, you could load up the all-new Forge mode and customize them to your own specifications. And with maps like Sandbox implemented so that players could really show off their creativity, the possibilities were endless. And with the file share option, you could even send your favorite creations to all your friends. Theater mode was a major highlight for me personally, as I was able to relive all those epic moments from both campaign and multiplayer over and over again, as well as share them with my friends. Got a last man standing in a match of Living Dead? I could share it. Got a Killionaire in an epic Griffball match? I could share it. Beating the campaign on Legendary with all skulls on? I could share it. And for those with a knack for theatrics, new machinimas were being born as well, along with vast improvements to existing ones like Red vs. Blue. If I had to come up with one major gripe about Halo 3, it's that the story wasn't as epic as Halo Combat Evolved or Halo 2. That's not to say it wasn't great by itself. I'll still never forget the battle against 2 scarabs, or the epic Warthog run as the Halo ring was literally shaking itself apart. But compared to Halo 2, the characters felt like shadows of their former selves. Take the Prophet of Truth for example. In Halo 2, he was a menacing politician, and we were always kept guessing when it came to his true intentions. But in Halo 3, he didn't have just a different voice actor, he had an entirely different personality.
To have you hung by your entrails and your corpse paraded through the city. But ultimately, the terms of your execution are up to me.
I am already dead.
Indeed. Do you know where we are?
The mausoleum of the Arbiter.
Quite so. Here rests the vanguard of the great journey. Every Arbiter from first to last. Each one created and consumed in times of extraordinary crisis.
As soon as they're up, re-establish contact with Lord Hood. Let him know.
All of you vermin, cowering in the dirt, thinking, what? I wonder, that you might escape the coming fire? No. Your world will burn until its surface is but glass, and not even your demon will live to creep, blackened from its hole to mar the reflection of our passage, the culmination of our journey. For your destruction is the will of the gods. And I am their instrument.
He went from being collected and mysterious to completely off-the-wall nuts. It was a jarring change for sure. Miranda Keyes is another one that stands out. In Halo 2, she was tough and to the point. In Halo 3, again, she's played by a different voice actor, but some of the lines she delivers sound very out of character compared to the things that she might have said and the way she would have said them in Halo 2.
To war.
Overall, though, it's an extremely minor nitpick on my part, especially considering that Bungie later released an expansion for the game titled Halo 3 ODST, which to this day still has to be one of the best stories and atmospheres of all the Halo games. You, as a new ODST rookie, are tasked with making your way through the ruined streets of New Mombasa while trying to catch up with your fellow squad mates. Each time you pick up one of their clues, you witness an epic flashback, all of which eventually connects you to the present time while also showcasing the epic journeys of each member of your team. The music is some of Marty O'Donnell's best for sure and hits all the right notes, whether the scene is full of action and excitement or if you're wandering the dark and desolate streets of the city.
Accurate diagnosis, or your money back.
Damn it, no! They're gonna burn this city and then glass the whole planet! Covenant bastards! Just like Reach all over again!
Made it out of there. Make it out of here. Do this stuff.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Mickey, you read me? Change your plans. You're coming to us.
Sky's kinda crowded, Gunny.
There's no other way. Covenant just waits at the highway. We're gonna keep rolling as far as we can. Get airborne. Fly the Phantom to my beacon.
Understood.
Whatever you do, stay clear of that carrier.
Firefight was another mode that was added to the series thanks to the introduction of the expansion, and it was every bit as fun and exciting as the campaign. I still remember loading up ONI Alpha Site and spending hours defending the building from endless waves sent from the Covenant Horde. And just like with Halo 3, you could play with 3 of your closest friends while you work towards not just achievements, but just having an absolute blast all around. Nothing can top an afternoon like an epic firefight match with your friends, and thanks to scoring now being a thing, you could compete against them while you were fighting by their side. At the end of the day, it's hard to really find anything wrong with Halo 3 and Halo 3 ODST. Whether it be the polished graphics, the perfect musical score, the multiplayer, whatever you can think of, it all fits so perfectly. I bought a grand total of 3 copies of the game because I kept wearing out my discs. That's how much I played Halo 3 and still do to this day. Halo 3 brings back so many happy memories for me, and I still hope that there's more to come. That's why when it comes to Halo 3, it is absolutely a collector's item. This completes my series of ranking all of the Halo games. I do hope that you enjoyed this series, and if you did, I hope you'll consider subscribing for more great content right here on MythicTyrant.com. And please let me know in the comment section below how you rank all of the Halo titles. Which Halo is your favorite, and which one is your least favorite? What are your happiest memories from this epic franchise? And I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you taking the time out of your busy day to sit down and watch this series. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. I'll catch you all right back here next time, and as always, I'm the Tyrant, signing off.